Things are higher in demand, and what comes with that? Costs going up. Those things in general are going to be a little bit more expensive. Although they've come down quite a bit, they were crazy for a while. Is Thailand still cheap, or has that ship sailed? And more importantly, did you miss it? So without a doubt, across all the Tempus TV channels, all the comments, messages, whatever it may be, the thing I get asked about the most, totally makes sense, is cost of living. Is Thailand really cheap? Is it hoopla? Is it still cheap? Totally makes sense. Money runs the world, and let's be honest, not every creator is completely transparent about everything. Well, luckily for the both of us, both you and I, right when I first got to Thailand, a much younger, more naive Tempus, I actually made a video where I went over in detail all of what I was spending. Now, of course, when you spend time in a place, you learn some places to save money, but I took a few of the main subjects, things that were gonna kind of stay the same no matter how long you're here, and I compared them. So we're gonna find out, as of right now, April 2024, is Thailand still cheap? I'm not gonna go into detail of how much I'm spending. We're just gonna give you a yes or a no if it's more expensive to when I personally got here for the first time in 2022. Okay, so starting out, we've got housing. Of course, this is a major one. Unless you're planning to sleep on the beach and be in a constant state of sweaty mess, you're gonna need a place to live. And granted, I've been very lucky with the condos that I've stayed at since I've been in Thailand. As a whole, I can see things going back up a little bit. Now, one thing to really take into account is I got here in July of 2022, so this is right after we were coming out of the whole COVID era. So that is something to think about. There was a lot of deals. People hadn't really started coming back in full force yet. When it comes to housing, I haven't seen too much of a drastic change. Things are higher in demand, and what comes with that? Costs going up. Now, one thing you're not going to be able to avoid no matter where you choose to live in Thailand is utilities, your electric, phone bills, internet, things like that. One nice thing about Thailand, especially compared to where I lived in America, is most utilities, especially electricity, water, things like that, they are regulated by the government. So the government says, hey, this is how much electricity costs, this is how much water costs. So most of the time, you're not gonna see too much variation. There is one thing I ran into when I first got to Thailand and I didn't know any better. When you especially rent a condo, if you are paying to anybody besides directly the electricity company, it is possible, it's not always gonna happen, but it is possible people are just gonna charge you more. If they're the ones getting the bills, they're the ones getting the meters checked, I mean, think about it, it's an opportunity. A lot of foreigners don't know better, so that is something to check. I tell everybody when you're getting ready to move into a building, find out what the building charge is per unit of electricity. Nobody ever got rich by wasting money. So when it comes to utilities, I personally haven't seen any change. I have noticed one thing with Wi-Fi and SIM cards especially, a lot of the specials that were running when I got to Thailand are no longer a thing. Luckily, if you got an older one, a lot of the time you're grandfathered in, but you might pay a little bit more for a SIM card or Wi-Fi than you did last time you were here. Okay, so food. This is a big one, and this is usually, I feel like when things are getting more expensive or less expensive, this is one of the first places you see it. And honestly, I have seen it a bit here in Pattaya, especially when you go to night markets or restaurants, places like that. A lot 7-Eleven hasn't really changed from what I've seen, but it hasn't really been too drastic. If I do notice it, it might be 10 or 20 baht here or there. The chicken lady you used to get fried chicken from at the market, it might be 10 or 20 more baht now, which isn't really that much when you think about it. But a big place I've noticed big differences is in grocery stores, especially when it comes to like specialty items in Thailand, beef, dairy, things like that. A lot of these things have to be imported anyway. So when prices are going up everywhere else in the world, it makes sense that those things are too. So you might see a little bit on your day-to-day, but if you grocery shop a lot, you're probably gonna see it in the grocery stores for sure. Okay, a pretty big expenditure for I feel like a lot of people that are coming to Pattaya, let's be honest, nightlife. So when I got here, there was so many happy hours. You couldn't look down the street without seeing a happy hour sign. 3 beers for 150 baht. The specials were everywhere. When I got here, nightlife was really cheap. It was easy to go out. You didn't have that deterrent of, oh, I don't want to spend a bunch of money. And yes, it is still cheap. You can still go out and have a good time for relatively cheap, especially compared to America. But nightlife is the one place where I have seen pretty extensive price hikes over the past year and a half, almost 2 years. A lot of those places don't have those specials anymore. Happy hours are a lot shorter. And in general, there's just not as many specials. More tourists coming back, same thing, more in demand. So nightlife has gotten more expensive, albeit it's still relatively cheap, especially if you're coming from the States. A really important part of your budget that I feel like a lot of people kind of forget about or don't, take as seriously. Maybe you don't put it as high on the list, because I really didn't when I first got here, and now that I've been here, it's one of my main expenditures that I'm always trying to think about how to optimize it a little bit more, and that has to do with visa services. Now when it comes to immigration, when I got here, everything's the same. All the actual immigration fees for extensions, things like that, those are all still the same. But if you spent any time in Thailand, you'll know that immigration is somewhat of a hassle. You gotta go hang out there. It's like going to the DMV in America. But luckily in Thailand, they have visa agents where you can essentially pay a middleman, they'll do the paperwork for you, and they'll get it taken care of. Visa agents have gotten much more expensive. Once again, all the tourists are back. Supply and demand, they can charge more. I've seen a lot of places when I first got here, a visa extension, if you're on a tourist visa, was around 2,000 baht. Now, most of the time, it's at least double that. Do not forget about how much your visa is gonna cost, because of course, you wanna stay legit. Now, if you're coming to Thailand, I'm assuming you wanna bounce around a little bit, especially if you're coming on vacation. Very rarely do most people wanna stay in one city. There's a lot to see in Thailand. So something to take into account is travel/hotels. Now, I have this weird thing where I'm constantly looking at flights. Even if I don't necessarily wanna go somewhere, I'm always checking flights. Although they've come down quite a bit, they were crazy for a while. International flights to Thailand are still expensive, and that rolls into domestic flights as well. Even though there's a bunch of domestic carriers that work throughout Thailand, they still kind of base everything on the international market. So flights, hotels, all that stuff, especially compared to maybe Seaward time or right after that, have gotten way more expensive. It blew my mind, the deal that I got on my tickets here and how much I was paying for hotels and stuff when I first got here. That is not the case anymore. But just like everything else, if you dig long enough or you book early, unless you're one of those wild people that likes to wait for those last minute deals, those things in general are gonna be a little bit more expensive. So for the most part, your day-to-day life is probably gonna be relatively the same. Now you might have to pay 10 more baht for your pad kapao, or that beach chair that used to be 100 baht might be 150 now. But there are a few things that have gone up quite a bit if you're planning on going out, if you're gonna be renting, if you're gonna be flying around the country, anything like that. And these can get really expensive really fast if you're not paying attention to them. So do your research, have a realistic budget set. And yes, to answer the question, Thailand is still cheap compared to America. It's not as cheap as it used to be, but let's be honest, nothing in the world is anymore. But what you can expect to pay for the same quality of life here that you would in America is drastically less. So don't believe any fear mongering. You're more than likely not getting priced out of Thailand. Thank you so much for tuning into another video. I hope I answered some questions for you. I'm gonna go take a 45-minute shower, and I will catch you guys in the next video.